to Science Matter, a research magazine podcast that discusses science matters. This is a space where we discuss science matters and emphasize that science really does matter. In today's episode, we have Mr. Mlu, a doctoral scholar and political science researcher who studies closely the different governmental rules in different countries in Africa. Hello, Mr. Mlu. Can you please introduce yourself to our audience?
Thank you, and hello to you, Mbendulo. I'm Lumanyano Ngcayisa. I am a PhD student. And so my focus is on authoritarianism, right? And looking at what that means and how it works in our continent. But the focus now that I've come to look into is how can we rethink authoritarianism? How could we use it as a positive rather than a negative? But we'll get into that a little bit later.
Sure. I'm sure someone is like, oh, okay, this guy now, where is this person from? With these big words. And now I'm like, authority, what is that actually? Can you please tell us what's your background, where are you coming from, and how did you get so far?
So, I now that you mentioned, I come very far away, but I'm from Gqeberha, in the Eastern Cape. That's where I grew up, born and raised, and then I moved later to a small town called Jeffreys Bay, where I would then do my primary and high school studies that side. And then I later on moved to the Free State, started off in Qwaqwa, and then later on moved to Bloemfontein and finished my most of my studies there. Right, yeah.
Oh, okay, great. So academia-wise, what was your undergrad degree up to this far? Now you're doing your PhD.
Yeah. So in terms of what I've studied so far, I completed a Bachelor of Arts in Governance and Policy Transformation. And so the focus there was primarily on how do we understand management? How do we understand administration? And, I had the privilege to also study organizational psychology to understand then how do we use people to the best of their abilities through this governance, right, to achieve a common goal and a common practice. And so that begins the golden thread between, my undergrad and then my postgrad studies. So I had the opportunity to get funded by NRF from my honors all the way until PhD. And so in my honors degree, I then focus on political science, but within political science, looking at the subfield of international relations, looking at things such as foreign policy and diplomacy, looking at international relations and its philosophers, looking at things such as global political economy and the likes. And so it's quite technical, but focused on that. And then I had a research, report that goes with it. And so in that research report, I then look at this idea of developmental authoritarianism. And I ask myself, look, how about we dig deeper in understanding what this new phenomenon is, right? And so I take this work, I, breathe life into it, and I conceptualize it into a framework that possibly African countries could use. And so in that, I do my master's in that same, topic, and then I just look at 3 case studies. So I look at Ethiopia, I look at Rwanda, and I look at Uganda. And in that, I realized that these new heads of states, for now I won't say whether democratic or undemocratic, right? Because they would challenge that notion. But I look at these heads of states, how they run in their countries and what impact that has. And so we get to realize that there's been a shift in how authoritarianism looks like in the 20th century and in the 21st century. And so with that, I dig deep in investigating what this type of governance model looks like in practice. what are the contributions it has, because there are positives, and then also what are the negatives. And so the emphasis of that research was to conceptualize and contextualize developmental authoritarianism in Africa.
Okay.
And of course, looking at these three cases. So I got to the gist of that, and from that, I was able then to move to my doctoral studies. And there, I need to dig deeper, right? You need to create something that's new to knowledge. And so with that now, I'm looking at how we could reframe, authoritarianism in the 21st century.
Sure.
And so we've seen that a lot of countries are behaving undemocratic. A lot of countries are illiberal, and we'll get to the definitions of these words. But then perhaps we could still take these so-called negatives and shift them around to create a governance model that can add a positive light to the socioeconomic development of our continent. And so I'm using maybe one or two case studies that I think we could start it there and build from that. So that's pretty much what I've studied and what I'm continuing to study now.
Oh, okay. It sounds like your research is continuous.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So what were the main findings as for, especially the one you did in your master's, when you were studying the different countries? Did you travel to those countries?
So unfortunately, I didn't get the privilege to travel.
So how did you do the research? Like
So
the method?
mine was predominantly literature study. You look at the public domain information that's there, and you try and filter out what is not working with the general phenomenon that you're looking for. So we have a criteria. And then as you find that, you develop a concept. That concept allows then for either the exploration of existing theory or phenomena, or to build. So with my master's, I was exploring something that I believe had not been fully explored. And for my PhD, I'm designing, I say in the title, the architecture of this new model. Because I am designing a new governance model that could perhaps, theoretically at least, assist us in seeing how could we turn around the negative connotation to authoritarianism and making it positive, right? And so that's what I'm doing now. But in terms of the findings of the masters, so we realize there's a few things I can highlight. One, there is no statistic that tells us that democracy outperforms authoritarianism, economically speaking. So in terms of, the economies of these different types of nations, there's no reason for us to believe that one is better than the other,
Sure.
right? What we then see is that there's a pact between democracies that they will support each other and that they will not go into war together because of something called liberal internationalism, right? And so this liberal internationalism means we are open to individual rights, we're open to trade and cooperation and creating peace in the world, right? And so the United Nations then preaches this. But who decided these values? These are the victors of World War I and World War II, right? These are Western countries that have said, these are the ideals we would like the world to follow. And so when you dig deep into, these international governmental organizations, you realize those with profound power are these same victors of, that war period. So from that, we then realize that perhaps not all these values are directly linked to the African diaspora. So what we see from this is, when we investigate, and I'll get deeper in a sec, but when we investigate the socio-political culture of what we call African personhood, right? we then understand that we as a people historically focus more on communal rights than we do on individual rights. So when we're going to say we are a liberal democracy, like in the case of South Africa, it means we're focusing on two things. One, the fact that the state should emphasize your individual growth and freedom to do as you so please, it is your life.
Sure.
That's the liberal element. And in the democratic element, the emphasis is you are then allowed to participate in the political life of this society by voting. But what people commonly associate authoritarianism with is the fact that you cannot, number one, vote, and two, that your rights are just infringed upon, okay? So there's this very, very negative connotation. And I understand historically the atrocities that have been committed in authoritarian countries is devastating. But the same atrocities have been done by democratic nations to other nations. And so if you remember, I said there's the pact between democracies that we will be okay, you and I, but it doesn't mean they cannot fight non-democracies. Because of this idea of democratization in the world, spreading democracy. Does this not sound similar to the idea of imperialism, right? Pushing ideals to the people. And so a similar wave took place in the 20th century.
Sure.
But in the 21st century, we are seeing changes take place. We're realizing that even democratic countries, well established, look at COVID, were instituting lockdowns, were not allowing people, were postponing, elections. Imagine, draconian law going across the board, right? People are forced for their own protection, because of this public health crisis, to put on masks and to stay at home. Rightfully so, I get it. But when we say we are democratic, we the people must choose that. When we say we are liberal, we the people must have the option to exit outside or to stay indoors.
Sure.
But so all of this is just to show that there's been this wave that takes place. So that's what I look at. And then I look at the fact that this developmental authoritarianism takes this very authoritarian notion that, look, you are the child as the masses. And as the state, we are the parent. And ours is to guide you for your own good. And it combines this parent-child relationship, right? The social contract between the people and the state. And it says, look, we are going to ensure your development if you compromise your individual rights and freedoms.
Okay.
And so I get into that and I realize that indeed, countries like Rwanda truly, met their target. 10% growth within what, a year after getting out of COVID? Rwanda, Ethiopia, Uganda, showing the most woman representation in leadership positions of government across the world. These are authoritarian countries. Why would this be the case? It means we can take what is perceived to be negative and make it positive. And what we need to do is to solve our own problems by recreating our own ideas for ourselves. And if we are going to benchmark in a way that it fits the context of your people, the society, as well as the economy. So that is, in a sense, is what I found from that. And the focus, though, on developmental authoritarianism is very deep on economic development. So in my PhD studies now, I've gone beyond economic development and I'm looking at socio-economic so that we see human development take place. Health, education, standard of living, not just, money in your bank and infrastructure. And so that's where I'm going with it.
Interesting. So now that you have all this information and this reading that you did, if you had power, I know you don't have it, if you had power to rule and you have to choose what kind of ruling that you would rule us, which one would you choose and why?
Well, I must first finish on the previous question
Sure.
so that I can answer this one, which is, I say in my findings, developmental authoritarianism is something that is the building blocks for democracy.
Okay.
The illusion, understandably, because we've created what is called classical typologies, that you are either democratic, you are authoritarian, you are an oligarchy, you are, right, a monarchy. What we've focused on is political regimes. All of that are regimes. My focus is on political systems, how we actually conduct ourselves in the reality. And so I argue that developmental authoritarianism is helping us transition once people have achieved economic goals so that they can enjoy their freedom in a liberal democracy later on.
Sure.
So if I had to govern, you know, maybe as a head of state,
Sure.
I don't know, I would speak to the people,
Okay.
make them understand that in order for us to reap the benefits, we need to start with putting in the work today. I would speak to the people to say that we can have a review period where you check, have I done my part? So that you can then say to me, if you haven't, we'd like to have someone else. And that's okay. But what is important is, are you willing to make the sacrifices today in order for you to reap the benefits tomorrow? And that would mean, can we revisit the way that we take in employment, right?
Okay.
The way we train people for the labor market, right? One, the emphasis is so great on white-collar jobs, but we have such a huge market for artisanship, for example. If we look at even those white-collar jobs, we look at people like myself who study political science, but then when the time comes for government to absorb us, we're not taken.
Sure.
In fact, we're taken for granted, right? And yet we're the experts who can help guide, you know, us out of
Sure.
sticky situations.
Sure.
So because I have, you know, this history with academia, have experts guide and direct you in the different fields that are important. Reach out to the people. People are actually willing to sacrifice small pleasures today, understanding that not only will they benefit in the future, but their children and their children's children will also benefit from this. And then you look at what is needed by the people in terms of their own goals to get the buy-in from the people. The reason why these, and I'll close here, because I could take forever, the reason why people in some of these authoritarian countries accept the leadership
Sure.
is because there's legitimacy that comes from people saying, I buy into what you are telling us as the leader. And they understand that it can be tough, but there is going to be change. And you look at countries, Ethiopia, Rwanda, where how they addressed COVID, how they came out of that situation.
Sure.
You look at Ethiopia and the Grand Renaissance Dam. You know, Ethiopia trying to take the Nile River, use the water pressure there to create electricity, sell that electricity to other neighboring countries. That's a profound thing to do. But if you're going to do that as the head of state, and then as you're doing that, you need to elect someone new, someone who's going to shift from that and think about, let's look at giving you social grants. In the now, which one is better? Social grants, because you need that assistance right this second. But in the future, when your country has so much energy that it can even sell it to other countries, It means there's enough broad economic development so that they can then come back and give you housing, healthcare, and you name it. And then we have human
Sure.
development.
I don't want to forget this question that I have right now. You said something about they are buying to whatever that was sold to them. Are you saying people in this country, they agreed to this? Was it something that it sounds democratic if they will agree to it. So in your studies, how did this shift happen from independency to this new type of ruling whereby individually my freedom is being compromised? And I hear you saying they buy into it. Why are you saying that? What did you find?
So to answer your question, I'll start, I'm an academic, so I always go back.
Sure.
In a political system, we look at three factors that are important.
Okay.
The political, the cultural, and the economic. These three, work coherently to create whether a liberal system or an illiberal system, right? So on the cultural side, let's make a simple example. As an African child, you have a somewhat respect for the decisions made by your elders in your own family, right? Mm-hmm. You believe beyond reasonable doubt that your elders in your family take decisions that are for your best interest, right? When they make whatever decision they make. It doesn't mean you don't have questions. It doesn't mean you don't sometimes wonder, but you understand if they are telling you, no, don't do this, yes, do this, most likely it's for your own interest. Now imagine that being done for the state, by the state. Look at COVID. So many, if we look at just South Africa, so many South Africans did not question the different stages of COVID where we're locked in or we're allowed out. Why? Because we are agreeable people, right? As Africans. We agree that there's a crisis, we should respond to it in the best way possible. And so the way you present this to people is that, look, there's this issue. I know how to get us out of the matter. The only thing I need from you is for you to trust in me and comply, and we will weather the storm and get out of it. And so that's why people agree, because they know that the end goal is still one that is positive.
Okay. Mr. T, did you agree to COVID, go at home? I feel like I only agreed to work from home. All the other things, it was forced. I don't think I did agree to that. That is profound and interesting. And the reason why it's very interesting, and we need people like you, people who did research in power, to not just make decisions based on what they're seeing and also what is happening in the world. So if you're to sell your conceptual framework that you came up with in your master's elevator pitch, what is the framework that you presented in your master's thesis?
That's a difficult question to answer on the basis that my PhD criticizes my master's. So the concept in my master's is not mine.
Okay.
I took my concept from Hilary Mathis,
Okay.
Who speaks about, in a very short article, speaks about developmental authoritarianism. In fact, she says the strong men, right?
Sure.
In these countries. Then I link this, to conceptualize it, I link it with, there's a gentleman called Dali Young, who speaks about authoritarian developmentalism from China,
Sure.
right? And then talks about that entire process of how the Chinese are doing it. And then I say what Hilary Mathis and I are talking about is derived from the Chinese model.
Okay.
Then I go further and I look at this social cultural element, and I use Motsamai Molefe, who speaks about African personhood, to try and say what are the people, thinking, what makes them act and do as they do, I guess. And so from that, I then say now in my PhD that although that was a good conceptualization and I proved that it does exist and I added value to that, let's look at something brand new.
Sure.
Something that I can then say I'm the architect of. And, I can always go back to improve or to modify. So in this new model, first and foremost, we need to break the difference between democracy and authoritarianism. So people make the mistake of believing that democracy is perfect and that free and fair elections means you have freedoms, rights, and so forth. That's not necessarily true. Democracy is its own thing. Can a country have free and fair elections? That's it. That's all democracy promises you. So countries that say we are a democracy are arguing that they hold elections, but what makes them undemocratic is the fact that those elections they hold are not free nor fair. All right? And so that makes them authoritarian. So these authoritarian countries, the main gist of it is simply they don't hold free and fair elections. That's it. So the election is either rigged, the election perhaps is influenced significantly by propaganda, and all other examples. Then we look at what is called liberalism, as well as illiberalism. So liberalism is the ideology that be free to be who you are. Individual rights, ownership, tolerance of people, and you name it, right? But even in that, it focuses on the idea that government should play a very minimal role. So the reason why we're struggling, and we argue that our government is not responding to our needs, is that it's following the entire ideal of a liberal democracy. Government plays a minimal role, right? But in an authoritarian country, government plays a significant role, which is why these authoritarian nations typically have welfare, they take care of their people in inverted commas, because theirs is to have a little bit more grip on what's happening in the entire lives of the people, even social lives, right? And so illiberalism would mean we are then distancing ourselves from the idea that you can freely choose to go outside and buy your favorite product, for you to go sit at the park and do nothing. No, you have to abide by the rules. People closely associate, the same way they make liberalism and democracy linked, they also make illiberalism and authoritarianism linked. And the reality is there's a separation. And so in looking at that separation, I then am investigating if we just say authoritarian and we see how we can rethink that and link it to a constructive way of thinking, we could possibly produce something that can allow African nations to achieve sustainable socioeconomic development.
Oh, thank you so much. That was so profound. So let's say maybe someone is watching there and they're interested in your research, maybe to work with you in the future, or they would like to reach out to you, for mentorship or inspiration or anything. Is there anything you would like to tell our viewers?
Wow. I don't know how to answer that one, but I'll try.
Are you on LinkedIn?
Yes, I am on LinkedIn, Lumanyano Ngcayisa there. I am on ResearchGate. Okay. What I did there is even publish things from my undergrad, because I wanted people to see the research progress.
Sure.
Starting small, building up to where I am now. And then they can reach out to me on those social media platforms. Okay. That's there, and to just do their best in their field, and possibly you could solve a problem that is not solved yet. Okay. And who knows where that leads. We all just want to do our best. That's about it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much for tuning in this episode. We've learned a lot of things. So if you're a researcher as well, funded by the NRF, and you'd like to visit us in the Science Matter podcast, you're more than welcome. Right now on the screen, you're seeing my email or our Science Matter email. Just send an email and say, hey, Mpendulo, I would like to come. This is my paper. Or also we have research nuggets, so you don't need to come to the studio. Just share your paper. When you publish, share your paper and let people see what we are doing as researchers, and also emphasize that science really does matter. I am Mpendulo Sibia and I read research papers for a living.